This shir today is a shir that I gave, a drosha actually that I gave the first night in the shul Oel Yankov in Antwerp. It's the second night actually from Pesach, Tovshin Pehei 2025. Mainly, I wanted to give three different answers on a very famous problem that everybody who learns the sugya would have, is that the Bnei Beseiroh, it says in the Gemara tells a story that the Bnei Beseiroh, when they actually had this case as this year where Pesach fell on Sunday, they didn't know whether or not it would be Doiche Shabbos, if the Korban Pesach is Doiche Shabbos. And the main question is that how can they have not known? So they had to ask somebody presented Hillel that came from Bovel, and it is Bavli. It's quite a disgrace for the Marover, for people from Eretz Yisrael, that somebody from Bovel had to come and teach them and tell them what halacha is, that indeed Korban Pesach is Doiche Shabbos. But how can the Bnei Beseiroh have forgotten something which probably statistically comes once every 7 years, maybe as the Yerushalmi asked that question, is once every 14 years at least, So it's pure statistics indeed. Maybe once every 7 years it can happen that it will not fall, but every 14 years it should for sure fall. So the Yerushalmi answers that that was what's Pashed. That is how it was, in order to give Hillel the new job, the new post that he was having. But in any case, I would like to give it a little bit. I would like to give three answers to that question. But I will ask another question, which is quite similar to this first one. Is we all know that, especially this year, the gap between the Prushim and the Tzedokim in terms of Sfiras HaOmer, but also in terms of Shavuos, will be very big. So the Karoim, the Tzedokim, they will do 6 days different. They will have a gap of 6 days between our Shavuos and their Shavuos, because normally they would have waited till Achron Shel Pesach to start counting. They have to wait for Shabbos, Mochos HaShabbos. And so they start only counting on Sunday, probably on what we call Achron Shel Pesach. And then we have started to count already on the second night, of course, from Pesach. And so this is a very big difference. But how can the Tzedokim actually disagree with the previous concepts, with what happened from their parents, from their grandparents? It was a calendar that was probably already set in stone so many generations since Klal Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim. So it's a bit of a difficult to understand how the Tzedokim. Now, of course, one way to explain them is indeed there were Tipshim, as many of the Rishonim called them, and also the Gemara calls them like that, or they were purely evil thinkers, etc. But on the other hand, when you look at them, the Tzedokim, basically they are not just Kaplikanye, as it said. They were thinkers. They were the elite of the society eventually, some would say. So basically, it's a bit of difficult to understand that. Basically, they were also going lechumra in Shabbos. They were talking in the dark. Maybe at least the Karoim, they were in the dark on Shabbos. So there is a bit of an understanding. There is a bit of a question mark to understand. Is how come that the Tzedokim changed a calendar against their own fathers and grandfathers? So that's a second point question. And the third point is, and that was a question which is more related on the night itself, as we were going to go, when I spoke between Mincha and Marav, we were going to go to the Seder night, and we were going to do the Seder night as if it is the first Seder night. We were going to say the same in the Muchan, the same Asher Kiddushonu, Lechol Matzah. So we were going to redo the whole principle as we were before, while we all knew, and everybody knows, and the children know, that it's a second Seder. It is not Tezvov, is not Mitzvah Be'erev Torah Matzah, but still we were saying we are Mekayim now the Mitzvah Be'erev Torah Matzah. So how can this be, and how can we explain that? So to answer first the third question, and then I will answer the second question, and then I will go back to the first question. So I will build this shiur in that direction. to understand how can we redo something which in Yom Tov Sheni, and feeling that we are acting, making an act, we are faking something. There is a point of view of Rabbeinu Sadigon, which is just interesting to know. Ki ein sofek meikore, he says, this is in Meseches Beitzo, Daf Dalet Umed Beis, in the Oitzer Goinim. So there he says that Rabbeinu Saadia Zal Omar Befirushoi, Ki ein sofek meikore, Elu HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzivo es Moshe Avdoi v'Omar liYisrael ki ba'oretz yeh lohem yom echad u'b'chutz la'oretz shnei yomim v'chein hoyu ma'olam. In other words, it's not because of a suffix, but this is simply because that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu has asked to Moshe Rabbeinu already at the time that every Jew that lives in Chutz La'aretz should keep 2 days, and every Jew that lives in Eretz Yisrael should keep only 1 day. So it says, he repeats himself a few times, and he says that the mitzvah basically, if and correctly, and that's what he says here, v'koire es zeh shvi, v'es zeh shvi, zeh nikra rishon, v'zeh nikra rishon. Al kein b'nei golis lases kein kemitzvah amur mipi ha'gevura. So, and then he says that maybe tshuva acheres ki anevim tzivos Yisrael shebechutz la'aretz enon yodim amitas elo hadover bevadai. So there is already starting to change the mind a little bit, but originally he wants to say that it's clear that the mitzvah min haTorah to keep 2 days and to say that this second night is actually tezvot. The second night is like the first night. And that is part of the mitzvah. So the mitzvah is to do that. And it comes mipi ha'gvura all the way from Moshe B'Sinai. So it's a very interesting Reb Sadigon. But there is another part which is also interesting. And he says that the reason why Chachumim changed when things have changed at some point is Ad sheyotzu aminim uvikshu Chachumim la'aros ki re'iyas ha'yereach v'cheshbon echotu. So he adds that in the middle of his explanation, which we will elaborate in a few minutes. But basically what he says, that the Chachomim wanted to show us that the Re'iyas, the Api Re'iyah and the Cheshbon of the calendar are actually the same. And it's a bit difficult to understand what it comes to say here, but it's one of his Yesoides. So, and I will explain that very soon. Now, to answer the second question, how can the Tzedokim change to something that existed already so many generations before? We have to look in the Gemara in Menuchos. The Gemara in Menuchos, Daf Samach Hei Umed Beis, brings down from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who actually argued with the Tzedokim. He is the first one in the Gemara Menuchos that brings all the answers that we have on the question of how can the Tzedokim, if you look in the Posuk, they might be right. It says Mimochas HaShabbos, and we are not counting Mochas HaShabbos. So a lot of answers go that the Shabbos means Yom Tov. That the Shabbos, that the Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. That's most of the answers, and that's also what we receive with us. I receive as a child. It was always said that Mochas HaShabbos means Yom Tov. But Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the first of the Tana, if the list there that brings down an answers, is he actually says, no, you're right. To the Tzedokim, Mochas HaShabbos means indeed Shabbos, but it's only a case. So he says, so either you count 50 days or you count 7 full weeks. So okay, so how can it be to count full weeks? Full weeks you only count, says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if it starts from Sunday till Shabbos. A week always starts Yom Rishon and ends on Yom HaShvi'i. So if you want Sheva Shabbos to Mimois Tiyano, then it's only possible if you count on Sunday and you end the week on Shabbos. But if you count on a Monday or Tuesday, whatever it is, then you have 50 days. Then you don't count weeks, but you count days. Is Hoketzat kan beyom tov shechal yos b'Shabbos. So in a case where Pesach falls on Shabbos, then indeed there are 7 full weeks. Kan beyom tov shechal yos b'emtza Shabbos, then you don't have the 7 full weeks. So that's what the Rashi explained, ביום טוב של פסח שחל להיות באמצע שבת, מתחילים למנוע למחרוסוי, מתוקם קרו ב50 יום, ולא שבועס שלימוס, אלו מתחילים למנוע באמצע שבת. And so basically the Shabbos in this context means Mimochos Shabbos means in after Shabbos Beresh, and it also means Shabbos is Timimos Tiano means full weeks. And so therefore they are indeed not full weeks. From this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, which is basically not a halacha, let's be very clear, but from here we see that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai held that the Sheva Shabbos Timimos Tiano means that it is this mitzvah is only chal, we only mekayim the mitzvah when Pesach falls on Shabbos. Because if Pesach doesn't fall on Shabbos, then we are only counting 50 Yom. So from this Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and the way that Rashi explains it in Menuchos Daf Samech Amud Beis, and I recommend you to go and look, and then you'll understand what I mean. But there you will see very clearly that according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, this year we actually in Toshim Pehei, we were not mekayim the Sheva Shabbos Timimos Tiyanu. And when you look in the Pasuk, the Tiyanu can mean it will become Sheva Shabbos Timimos, or it can mean it should become Tiyanu as a tzivui. And so my theory is, and that's purely a theory, I don't have any sources to prove it. There are maybe some elements, but I will leave it for now. But the theory is that Pesach always fell on Shabbos. In other words, that the Chazal, until Antignois, as we shall see, always made sure that Pesach should fall on Shabbos, because that's also a mitzvah. Sheva Shabbos is Timimos Tienu. How are we making the Sheva Shabbos Timimos Tienu? By putting Pesach on Shabbos. So that's the way that we can understand the Gemara in any case. But it is very interesting to say that, because the Reb Sadia going again, but not in Beitza, but this time in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chuf Omed Aleph, he says that the Beney Doiro v'Omar Reb Sadia going ki Beney Doiro uv Beis Dino shel Antignois ish soichoi iskinu din re'iyas halevono bechidusha berosh chodesh kedei levatel divrei tzedok ubaitus sho yotanim bohem al hachachomim b'midas zman hachodesh. So basically, the calendar that we have actually has gone through a few changes, and it is Antignois ish soichoi, which is the first one to change the calendar again and to do it al pi re'iyah. So Reb Sadia Gaon has a chiddush, and it's brought down by Rabbeinu Hananel in Shas and in his Perush al HaTorah, and also in Rabbeinu Bechaye on Parshas Boy. He brings it down that originally it was always al pi cheshbon. Then from Antignois until the time of Abai and Rove about it was al pi re'iyah, and after Abai Rove it went back al pi cheshbon. So that's the story that happened here. So it became, at the time of Antignois, it became al pi re'iyah. Now normally the pshat is, according to Reb Sadia Gaon, the cheshbon that we have today is also the cheshbon that existed in Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's not like a cheshbon A al pi re'iyah and a cheshbon B, but it means that the calendar was the same as we have today. So from the time from Moshe Rabbeinu until Antignois, it was our calendar. Then we had a bit of a break, and then we went back to our calendar. It was the original one. But it's not the proof. We don't. My chiddush I would like to say is that maybe the very first al pi cheshbon dik luach was actually one that made sure that Pesach should always fall on Shabbos, to enable us to be mekayim the mitzvah of Sheva Shabbos Timimos Tiyanu, because otherwise Timimos Tiyanu would not be mekayim if it would fall in the middle of the week, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And that would mean that since Antignois is the first to have changed that, to have disconnected the cheshbon, but to do it purely out of looking in the sky, that would mean that although they probably still, in that theory, try to get Shabbos and Pesach to fall together, but if they could not reach that, then of course it can happen that Pesach would fall on a Sunday or would fall on a Friday. And if that is the case, then we have a problem, what do you do then? What do you mean, what do you have a problem? Is since we don't have, it had never happened before. It was 1,500 years, 2,000 years, I don't know how long, between Moshe Mitzrayim and Antignois. That would mean that for thousands of years, we always had Pesach falling on Shabbos. The moment that the Antignois changed the calendar and suddenly Pesach and Shabbos could not be aligned, then the question is, when do we start counting? Because in the Posuk it says Mimochos HaShabbos, but we all know it after Pesach. So what is the Goyrem? What was the Goyrem that we always were counting on Motzei Shabbos? Is it because it was Motzei Yom Tov, or is it because it was Motzei Shabbos? And since we don't know, so the Tzedokim they held Poshut as it's written in the Posuk Mimochos HaShabbos. And on that says the Prushim, no, because it also says 50 days. So you see that Be'etzem, it is Tolo in the Pesach and not in the Shabbos. So the argument of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is very strong, because why does the Torah have to add and to say that it's also Chamishim Yom? Why does the Torah have to add that? If it would be always Motzei Shabbos, then you don't have to add Chamishim Yom. Elomai, that you have two cases. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is very clearly to be understood, because suddenly there is a shift, and the link between Shabbos and Pesach and Shabbos disappeared, and therefore it could get disconnected. And it's the first time. So they did not have a tradition. The tradition was always Motzei Shabbos. Why? Because Pesach always fell on the Shabbos. And they still tried to do that. And so the answer then to the question of how come that Tzedokim changed, we have kind of historically maybe found an answer with a theory which probably obviously could be not true. So I'm not claiming that this is the truth, but I just give an answer that can explain this kind of question that we might have. And by the way, just for your information, there is a very famous Kuzari that actually says clearly, if you want, that, if you also read it the same way that I'm reading it, is that the Tzedokim were right. That always, we were always counting the Sfira Mimochos HaShabbos, but that we have changed. In other words, that the Echot Min HaKohanim says that the Etzem Amuvan Mimilat Mimochos HaShabbos and Mimochos HaShabbos Shehum Yom Rishon. It's clear that he agrees to Sheloi Nachloik Im HaKaroim, that we should not be choilek, that they are right. Neumar she'echot min hakohanim, o yashoftim, o yameluchim, haretzuim min das hasanen v'chol hachachomim, ro ki hakavonu min hamispor hahu lo sum 50 yom ben bikur so'oich mevikur tzichetim. Ushmiras shivo shavuos she'em sheva shavuos temimois, v'nosan lonu dimyon betchilas yom hashavua. Neumar im tiascho lo meochel chermish bakomo miyom rishon, tagiat yom rishon. But if Yom Sheni, Tagiat Yom Sheni. The Iker is, why do we count Sfira? When should you count Sfira according to the Torah? Is V'hochel Chermish Munach Oleinu. But B'chol Eis Sheniro Shu'uroi, you're allowed to start counting Sfira So'omer whenever you want, as long as it is between by the first cutting of the So'orim. When you start cutting the So'orim, that should be the day that you are going to count the Sfira, and then what you need is 7 weeks between that day and the Shavuos, the Yom Tov of Shavuos, that you bring the Shtei Alechen. So it's Bechol Eish Nira Shuroi, Naschil Boy V'Nispor Mimenu, but he says, V'kovu Oisoi, but this Chochem or Kohen or Shofet or Melech that was together with the Sanhedrin, v'kov oiseh sheyehu Yom Sheni shel Pesach, and he put it on the Yom Sheni shel Pesach, v'lo yeh bo zeh setir laTorah. And it will, with that, we are not disagreeing with what is written in the Torah. So as long as it is not in a contradiction with the text, we can change, basically. And a Chochem Echad came and he changed. And he says that Mimochos HaShabbos does not mean that it has to be Mimochos HaShabbos, but like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, it's only in a case it is. Then it will be Mimochos HaShabbos, as long as you can give it an answer. And we were mechuyev, he says, to be mekabel for Torah. So in other words, there is originally it was like the Tzedokim, but we changed it. So this gives you another explanation of another answer of why the Tzedokim argued, although that normally they should not, they should have a tradition. Yes, they follow the tradition. We didn't follow the tradition. It's a very interesting, quite shocking, to be honest, and fair kuzari, but it's also a kuzari that explains us the koyach of the Chachomim to change a masoires if they see fit, as long as it does not contradict the Torah Shebichsav. So the Torah Shebal Peh, and I already gave a shir about that, the Torah Shebal Peh can be changed, but not the Torah Shebichsav. The Torah Shebichsav is fixed, and everything that you do has to be able to fit into the Torah Shebichsav. If it cannot be fit, then you have a problem. Then you're not allowed to change. But there is clearly, according to the Kuzari, another answer of on this question of why the Tzedokim changed something which they should not, which existed, already thousands of years. Come to the first question, which is the case that the story with the Beney Beseiroh, that the Gemara says in Psochim Daf Samar Vav Omed Aleph, Tonu Rabun Aloch Zu Nelmu BeBeney Beseiroh, that Pam Achas Chala Bo'osor Lies BeShabbos Shochu Velo Yodu Im Pesach Doiches HaShabbos Im Lav. Amru Klum יש אודם שיודע אם פסח דרך את השבת אם לאו, אמרו להם, אודם אחד יש שעולו מבובל והילל הבבלי שמוי ששימש שני גדוי להדור שמי ואפתלי ויודע אם פסח דרך את השבת אם לאו. שולחו וקורו לו, אמרו לו כלום, and then he gives him, Hillel gives the answer that it is דרך השבת. He gives proofs with all kind of limudim, and he also tells them that this is what he learned from Shmai and Naphtali. Basically, the question is, of course, like we said originally, why did they forget? So according to what I just explained, it could be, although there is many generations, there are at least, I think, 4 or 5 generations between Antignois and Hillel, but we don't know how long it was, this gap in terms of times. Maybe in the Seder HaDoros it will give a bit more of dates, but I think it's quite a distance, many decades between those two. But you see here, in any case, that probably, as I explained you, the original calendar, even when it changed to Al Pi Re'iyah according from the time of Antignois, but they still tried at least to keep it on Shabbos in order to enable us to be mekayim the mitzvah of Sheva Shabbos Timimos Tiyenu. And so therefore it's possible that they continuously tried for many years, 100 years. They tried to keep it on Shabbos, and they always were successful. One year there was an accident and they could not do it, and therefore Pesach fell on a Sunday. And if Pesach was on a Sunday, Erev Pesach was on a Shabbos, and they were stuck. They had no Masoires anymore because it's too long ago. It was not supposed to fall like that, and so therefore they didn't know what it was, and they forgot in terms of hundreds of years that it didn't fall. So what do you do in that case? And so therefore it's there was this they brought down from Hillel that he remembered. So this is another answer to the first answer to that question. So yes, they forgot because it did not happen so often. It happened nearly never. There is a second answer that I would like to give, and that's based on the Sfas Emes. The Sfas Emes actually explains that the whole, it is actually Sfas Emes on Purim. He has a few years, many years, and you can see very clearly, especially in the end, the last years, that he really clearly speaks about the transition from a world from Torah Shebichsav to a world of Torah Shebal Peh. Normally, the traditional way of seeing Torah Shebal Peh is that it was given on Sinai. So both Torah Shebal Peh and Torah Shebichsav were both equal and were given on Sinai. And they actually complement each other, or they are even part of each other and cannot be separated. But the Sfas Emes, he disagrees, and this is also the viewpoints of other Rishonim. It's like I said, it's not a traditional viewpoint, but it's a very interesting and a daring point of view from the Sfas Emes. And he says, "Lechein ato acham apol asomon nase derech chodosh el haTorah v'hu bechinas Torah Shebal Peh." A new way was created, a derech chodosh el haTorah. It's a very interesting expression. Ki Megillas Esther hi haschole leTorah shebal peh. So the Megillas Esther is an aschole, and therefore he says that it's the reason why we are calling it that's why it's called the Nigeres, and it's also called the Sefer. So he says that the Megillas Esther is actually the last book of the Torah Shebichsav. So when they wanted to add or not the Megillas Esther in the 24 in the Torah, the Sefer Torahs, the Sifrei Kedusha, Sifrei of the Torah, the Tanakh, they doubted, and because be'etzem they would consider the Megillas Esther to be Torah Shebal Peh. But then they decided to add it into the Torah Shebichsav, but it remained with the status of a hybrid status. So it's considered a Igeres, that is Torah Shebal Peh, but also a Sefer, if you read it. Therefore, also there are some issues with the Megillah. As you remember, a lot of Tanoim hold that Megillas Esther is not Metam B'Yadayim, or they did not, in Sanhedrin explains that some Amorim did not want to give a high covet to the Megillas Esther because they saw it as a lower level of Kedusha, because it's kind of a transitional Sefer. It's a book that is Be'etzem Torah Shebal Peh that became Torah Shebichsav, but it's the beginning. He calls it in some place kind of the Chibur. Megillah Zois hi inyan Chibur Torah Shebichsav v'Torah Shebal Peh. And therefore, Lechein Nikra Sefer v'Nikra Igeres. There's a very interesting, he says also, Sheme'az hischilo kol takones anshe Knesses HaGdoilo, u'lechein nikres Igeres v'nikres Sefer. So he explains that in the first Beis HaMikdash, it was, everything was a Torah Shebichsav. Beis HaMikdash Rishon no inyan Torah Shebichsav, aval Beis HaMikdash Sheni hoye inyan Torah Shebal Peh. So from the first Beis HaMikdash to the second Beis HaMikdash, the world changed, basically. We went from a Torah Shebichsav to what we call the Inyan of Torah Shebal Peh. It's a start of a new era where, if you want, the Nevi'im, and he brings it also down, there were 48 Nevi'im, but this 48 Nevi'im is connected the 48 Bo'oson Memches Nevi'im, he says, Mechuvonim lememches devorim she'aTorah niknis bohem. So in Kinyan Torah, the Kinyan Torah is our 48 elements of Kinyan Torah. And so we went from the Nevi'im to the Chachomim. We went from divine message that we received, intervention, to Torah la b'shamayim hi, and it is the Chachomim that actually took over, that replaced the Nevi'im. It's a very beautiful concept. Maybe, and this I want to add, is maybe the 48 cities of the Levium is maybe the link between those two. So there are 48 Nevi'im, there are 48 cities of the Levium, and there are 48 different Kinyan Torah. There is a lot to be able to elaborate on that. And by the way, it's outside that drosha that I was giving, but something to think about is that they put the Sanhedrin into the second Beis HaMikdash. For me personally, the reason why the Sanhedrin went into the Lishkas HaGozis was because there was no Oren. The Oren is the two Luchos and the Torah Shebichsav. When the Oren was gone and the second Beis HaMikdash was built without the Oren, it's the Torah Shebal Peh started. And therefore the Sanhedrin is the source of the Torah Shebal Peh are the Sanhedrin. And therefore the Sanhedrin were put inside of the Beis HaMikdash through the Lishkas HaGozis. Because personally, I don't know, but I don't think that there was Lishkas HaGozis in the first Beis HaMikdash, but that's something another shiur eventually to be able to develop. But what you see here is that the Torah Shebal Peh just started at that time. Even the Beney Beseiroh were also originally in the beginning phase of the Torah Shebal Peh. The Anshe Knesses HaGdoilo stopped, then was Shemonat Tzadik was the last one, then Antiknoi started, and then a few generations, I think 4 generations later. So it was rather new, the way that the Torah Shebal Peh had to be developed. And so it is very possible, and I will bring you a proof from Reb Chatzkel Avramsky, but it's very possible that the midas shator nidreshes, the way that we can learn the Torah Shebal Peh, the tools that we have in order to know how are we going to learn the Torah, how are we going to create new halachas, that this actually was not yet fully established. Because there is a very interesting Tosefta. The Tosefta in Sanhedrin, Perik Shvi at the end, brings down, and it's brought down in the Chazoin Yecheskel from Reb Chatzkel Avramsky on the Tosefta from his version, and he says Sheva midos dorash hillel lifnei zikne Beseiroh kal v'chomer gzer shove binyan av kosov echod binyan av u'shnei ksuvim klal u'prat u'klal u'kayotze bo mimokem acher and dovet alomed minyono elu Sheva midos shedorash hillel azoken lifnei zikne Beseiroh. So these are the 7 midas that he was doirish. So it's very interesting that that Reb Chatzkel Avramsky, he says Dora Shilel Lifnei Zikne Beseiroh be'inyan shechal arbo also benisan b'Shabbos. Im shchitas korban Pesach doiche Shabbos oloi. V'dora shlohem sheva midas shekol achas mesayet lechaverto machziko estamo. But basically, it's very interesting. So this is the first time that apparently the Bnei Beseiroh, that Hillel could teach something to the Bnei Beseiroh. So either they knew the Midrash HaTorah Nidreshes, and he used all those 7 in order to prove his point, or they even did not know properly the 7 Midrash HaTorah Nidreshes. The Netziv would have said that these were the 7 Midrash that Hillel introduced, and then Rabbi Shmuel introduced 13. But it's basically every generation has its own midas, and Hillel is the one that introduces the 7 midas, and that is why it says Sheva midas dorash Hillel azok lifnei zikne Beseiroh, that it was the first time that it was actually introduced because it was new. The Torah Shebal Peh was still fresh, and it was in its infancy. We didn't know all the tools that we had in order to be able to learn halachas from the Torah Shebichsav, as we don't have Nevi'im anymore, and so therefore we have Hillel is the first one to have given a structured and you could even call an academic way of learning the Torah, and so that's the second answer. So basically, the Bnei Beseiroh, of course, they knew the Masoros was there, but the question is, we cannot learn it anymore by Masoros. Every Masoros needs to have a proof of the Torah Shebichsav through the Torah Shebal Peh. So the Masoros is kind of something which has stopped till the Anshe Knesset Agdoilo. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Messina Sur Leshua Shua Skenim Nevin Anshe Knesset Agdoilo, and then it was not anymore Masoros, but then it started the Torah Shebal Peh, that things have to be learned, as we said already once in the Rambam, that the new generations can learn differently. There is no Masoros anymore. If there is a Masoros, then we have to, if the only reason why we keep that halacha is purely out of Masoros, then of course, then there is a Masoros. But if there is no Masoros, then you have to create it according to the Yud Midrash HaTorah Nidreshes plan, or even when there is a Masoros, you still are mechuyev, and that is the inyan, is to be able to prove it from the posuk. And if you cannot prove it, then indeed you have to change. You have to disagree with the previous Masoros, and you have to create a new halacha, as we explained and as the Rambam explains in Hilchos Mamrim, as also with the Or Someach, although the Or Someach goes more with the Masoros first, and then if no Masoros, then we learn from the Yud Gimel Midas. But in any case, the idea here is that the Bnei Beseiroh wanted to learn it from the Torah Shebal Peh, but they did not know how we can give it a status of Torah Shebal Peh. Hillel is the one that told us to taught them. He taught them how to learn this halacha that they knew was Doiche Shabbos, but still we did not know how they learn it from the psukim through the Midrash HaTorah Nidreshes. So that's the second answer. The third answer I would like to give is based on the Chasam Sofer. So the Chasam Sofer, actually, it's very interesting that he wants to say that based on that what happened in the Chashmonoim, that the Chashmonoim, there is nobody got the Chashmonoim from one of Helimu Einom mi Posuk LeYosef Shevet mi Yehuda, that because they did not follow the brocha that Yaakov gave to Yehuda, that lo yosur shevet mi Yehuda, since they disagreed with that and they did not follow that, they were over on that mitzvah or lav, if you want. It's not a loisase in the Tayag mitzvahs. That's a separate question. Why not? But in any case, they did not follow that that issue. They were over on that lav, and therefore all the melucha got destroyed, and nobody is left over of the Chashmonoim. And so when the Beney Beseiroh kind of, and that's my interpretation of the Chasam Sofer, when the Beney Beseiroh kind of wanted to put Hillel on top, is because Hillel was from Yehuda, from Shevet Yehuda, and so therefore they put him up on the Nesius of the Sanhedrin. So not only the Melucha has to be from Yehuda, but also when it comes to religion. So not only the national concept have to come from Yehuda, the leadership, but also the leadership of religion of the Halacha has to come from Yehuda. I think there is a Gemara in Bava Basra that says in Sanhedrin that hey Omed Aleph umechoykek mi bein raglov elu bnei bonov shel Hillel shem lamdim teure berabim. So you see here that the Bnei Hillel, they were melamdim Torah berabim, and they were considered mechoik b'mein raglov, which is the brocha that comes together with the loyosov shevet mi Yehuda. So it is because of Yehuda, and so therefore the idea, says the Chasam Sofer, that the Pesach that falls on a Sunday, in other words, that you have to be doich Shabbos for the Korban Pesach. Normally, if there would have been a Beis Hamikdash, that is a very how do you call it? Open moment, it's interesting moment for to be mizenirosh as man kozer roy legeula yoser. Why? Because this typically is a day. Also, he explains that the first Pesach that Klal Yisrael went into Eretz Yisrael also fell on a Sunday, and so the geula comes. Typically seems to be coming from a year where Pesach falls on a Sunday, and therefore this is a possible third explanation, that the third answer on the question how can the Bnei Beseiroh have forgotten, that they did not forget, but what they wanted is they wanted to actually look for somebody that can give an answer to this question, and hopefully he would be from the Shevet Yehuda in order to give him a place in the Sanhedrin, to avoid having the same having the same end as the Chashmonoim had, because they did not follow that lo yosef shevet mi Yehuda. So we have here three answers. The first answer from the question, why did the Beney Beseiroh, how can the Beney Beseiroh have forgotten, is either because for thousands of years it rarely happened that Pesach should not fall on the Shabbos, in order to be mekayim the mitzvah of Sheva Shabbos Temimos Tiyenu according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. The second answer is that they knew, of course, that it was the Shabbos, but since that was the era of the beginnings of the Torah Shebaal Peh, as the Sas Emes explained, they did not know how to learn it from the Psukim, how to make it as a chokhmah, not just as a masoiris, but to create that human beings should be able to come up with a logic in order to use that halacha, to be able to form that halacha. And that's what Hillel did, and he did it with the 7 midos, or he created 7 midos. He kind of proposed 7 tools, and therefore they put him as a head of a Sanhedrin. And the third answer is it was more as an kind of to correct the situation where the Beney Beseiroh were not from Yehuda, as the Chasam Sofer explains, but Hillel was from Yehuda, is to put Mechoik ben Raglov, Yosef Shevet me Yehuda, is to put somebody from Yehuda that knows how to deal with the Sanhedrin, and that knows how to add to the Torah, and therefore they put up Hillel. They themselves resigned and put up Hillel in the job of Nossi as of the Sanhedrin. So may we be take zoiche to the Geula Shleima, hopefully this year still, to be able to see take Shnas Geula, as the Chasam Sofer said, that it is royu in a year where Pesach falls on Sunday, that apparently that's when Geulas are coming. Maybe we take zoiche to the Geula Shleima, Meir of Yomeinu, Amen.